I'm Peter Stanton, publisher of the Worcester Business Journal, and on behalf of the Journal and our co-producers for this morning's event, the Worcester Regional Chamber of Commerce, welcome to our annual Economic Forecast event. This annual event has become well known for its terrific presenters, and this year promises to be no exception. We're extremely honored to have with us a wonderful panel: Ted Lapres, the CEO of Nipro Inc., John Mahoney, the Vice Chairman of Staples, and they will each talk about how they see the economy and the year ahead through the lens of their world-class organizations. And we're extra pleased to have Tim McGee, a highly decorated economist and the Director of Macro Strategy and Research at U.S. Trust, part of Bank of America's Private Wealth Management Group, here to share his views on the economy. We were just asking him whether it's thumbs up, thumbs down, and he's still deciding. So events like this take a lot of work to pull off, and we'd like to thank those organizations that have been integral in making this morning's economic forecast a reality, and that is our presenting sponsors, Bank of America, Charter Business, and Nichols College, and our supporting sponsors, Partridge Snow and Hahn, and Bolus Lynch. And we'd also like to thank our media sponsors, WCRN. A couple of housekeeping items. On your table, there are some pink 3x5 cards. And the reason those cards are there is that what we're going to ask you to do is, if you have a question during the presentations, please write it down. Just as the presenters are wrapping up, we're going to be collecting those cards, and those cards will come up to our moderator, who will then sort of sort through them, and we'll get to as many questions as we possibly can during the Q&A period. So please write down questions you have during the presentations, and we'll make sure we go around and pick those up. Second, I'm just going to run through very briefly. The other piece of paper that's on there is a little 5x8 sheet, and it says Economic Forecast for 2012. You know, where do you think the Dow, state and federal unemployment rate, and the annual GDP will be at come year's end? And we asked that very same question last year, and we encouraged more of you to participate. We had about 30 folks out of the whole group enter last year, and I'm going to show you, I'm just going to mention the winner, but I'm going to show you the top 5 in the 4 categories and then show you the overall winner. So this is our sort of, one would call it, amateur economists of the year. And so the first slide is the Dow Jones Industrial Average. Bernard Johnson's from Interrise was 12,275 on a 12,217 final Dow average for the end of December. The next one is the federal unemployment rate. Steve Yurden from Devereaux hit that rate on the money at 8.5%. Congratulations. The next one is the Massachusetts unemployment rate, which actually was better than Mark O'Brien III had 6.5%, but the closest was Steve Carpinella from TD Bank and Elliot Werman from Nichols College. You'll see a lot of Nichols College names up here. They had some bright folks here last year. We'll see how they do this year. And next is the national GDP. David Jones from Nichols College, 1.9%, the closest. John Medbury and Hans Despian from Nichols just right next to him. And finally, when you combine all 4 categories, the economist of the year, sort of the Swami of central Massachusetts, is none other than Steve Yurden from Devereaux. Steve, can you stand up? We'll get you an award afterwards. He's here, I think. There he is. Let's all invest with Steve. And we've got gifts for the top winners in each category. We've got a nice gift certificate, and for Steve, we have an extra special one to Series Bistro, which is the beautiful restaurant upstairs in the Beechwood Hotel. So thank you to the Beechwood for that. Okay, so it is now my pleasure to hand over the mic to our event partner and good friend Dick Kennedy, the CEO of the Worcester Chamber.
Thank you, good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure for the Worcester Regional Chamber of Commerce to partner with the Worcester Business Journal on this wonderful event. As you can see, we're at a very large group here and very anxious to hear about the upcoming year. You know, you talked about the term pessimist and optimist. I have to bore you quickly with a joke that I've heard probably 40 years ago, and that's 2 identical twins about 6 years old, one a very optimistic little boy, one a very pessimistic little boy, and they're doing a little test. they bring a psychologist in and they decide that they're going to test them out and see their reaction to various stimulus. So they fill a barn with manure, and they take the pessimistic little boy in there, and they said, all right, go ahead in there, and they're going to gauge his reaction. Within about 5 seconds, he's out, and he said, it smells terrible in there. I'm going to take a shower. He said, I can't believe I had to go into that barn. And they said, okay, put the optimistic little boy in there. 5 seconds goes by, 10 seconds, a minute, 2 minutes. About 5 minutes later, they're getting very concerned about him. And they go inside, and they find him furiously digging down into the pile of manure. And they say, what are you doing? He said, look, with all the manure in here, there's got to be a pony under there someplace. That's kind of the way I look at the year 2012. But it is really a pleasure to be hosting with the Business Journal, John, Ted, and Tim, and we look for a very exciting morning. I won't labor this, but say a big thank you to the staff of the Worcester Business Journal and the Chamber for putting this together. It's wonderful to have you all here, and as I said, it's a pleasure, and I look forward to a very exciting morning. Thank you very much.
Okay, and we're going to get to hear briefly from each of our presenting sponsors. And first, I'd like to ask up Ed Shea, who's the market president of the Central Mass Northeast region for Bank of America. Edwin.
Good morning, everybody. First, I'd like to thank the Peter Stanton and Dick Kennedy from the Worcester Business Journal and Chamber, respectively, and their teams for pulling this great event together. I'm proud to be here on behalf of Bank of America Merrill Lynch and sponsoring this event. Should introduce and take time to introduce our Matt Shealy, who's a resident director of our Merrill Lynch office, which is located at 100 Front Street in downtown Worcester. And if you haven't been there, they've been there just under a year, but we're happy to be staffed up again with our Merrill Lynch partners in downtown Worcester. Sponsoring this event is a continuation of our commitment to our customers, whether it's an institution, an individual, or a business, in bringing our resources to help each of those segments be successful. We've been delivering for businesses in Massachusetts with our predecessor banks for over 200 years, and we look forward to continuing that. Our commitment is demonstrated too, and I think in today's announcement or yesterday's announcement, where Bank of America is hiring 32 small business bankers here in Massachusetts, and that's part of our commitment to hire 1,000 small business bankers across the country. We're also proud to have Tim McGee here from our U.S. Trust Bank, Merrill Lynch, U.S. Trust Bank of America Wealth Management team, and his expertise from an economic perspective to share with you this morning. So to our customers out there, thank you for our business. If you're not a customer, we invite you to become one. Thank you.
And next, I'd like to invite up Martin Kitchens from Charter Business. Martin.
Good morning, folks. My name is Martin Kitchens, not Martin Bathroom, and I'm a sales manager representing Charter Business. As you know, Charter Business is an entity of Charter Communications. We are a broadband-based solution company where we offer high-end solutions to small, medium, and enterprise business customers. Our solutions include video, phone, voice, and data. We have optical Ethernet as well. If you haven't done so already and met one of our great reps, I implore you to reach out so we can actually engage in conversation about your needs and what Charter can provide for you as it relates to your business solutions. And if you don't know about our great agent referral program, there's a great opportunity for everyone in this room to earn $5,000 a month in extra cash. How does that sound to everyone? All right, so if you're looking for money in economic times like this, please reach out to our Charter Business team over here on the left, all right? And on behalf of Charter, I really want to thank you for the opportunity to present and sponsor this great gathering. A lot of people, a lot of depth, and it's good to see. So please please reach out to one of our reps. All right, thank you very much.
And next, I'd like to invite up Dawn Sherman. Dawn is the Interim Dean of Graduate and Professional Studies at Nichols College.
Good morning. First, I would like to say it was wonderful to see so many Nichols students, faculty, and alumni on that list of people who accurately predicted our economy over the past year. So congratulations. We're thrilled. We're very pleased. Nichols College is proud to once again serve as a sponsor of the Economic Forecast Breakfast. It is exciting to see so many business professionals from the local area gathered together to discuss the serious economic conditions that we all face. The size of this crowd sends a clear message that our economy continues to be a topic that impacts each of us. Small businesses and large, for-profit and the not-for-profit alike. And as competitive as the market may be, we are all more connected and dependent than may seem apparent. Each of us holds a piece of the local economy. It is therefore heartening to have the opportunity this morning to bring people together to work on making our local economy even stronger. As a business school, Nichols trains students to more fully understand the local economy through case studies, company visits, internships, and consulting projects. Whether studying business at the undergraduate level or at the graduate level working on an MBA or Master of Organizational Leadership degree, Nichols students are able to engage in critical thinking for the betterment of our local economy. Nichols College graduates are well prepared to address economic issues, and with an institutional focus on career and professional development, our students are both ready and able to make an immediate and significant impact in the local workforce. At Nichols College, we also recognize the interdependency of the international economy with our local economy. To this end, a group of Nichols graduate students and faculty will spend a week in Brazil in May as part of a graduate course. This will be co-taught by Salesian College professors in Brazil, along with a Nichols College faculty member. The students will also visit 2 Brazilian companies to more fully understand the international economy firsthand. Nichols graduates are knowledgeable and prepared. They are young women, young men, and older women and men as well, to add value to local companies. And if you're interested in meeting some of our outstanding students, you're welcome to attend our career fair on March 6th. Our thanks to the Worcester Business Journal for providing a venue for a large-scale discussion about the local economy and for bringing us all together today for that purpose. Enjoy your morning, and thank you.
Okay, thank you so much again to Bank of America and to Charter Business and to Nichols College, as well as Partridge, Snow and Hahn and Bolus Lynch. They all have stepped up to help make this event happen. And without further ado, what I'm going to do is invite all 3 of our panelist presenters up here, and then the event is going to be moderated by Brandon Butler, our senior staff writer at the Worcester Business Journal. So John and Ted and Tim, would you come up to the stage, and Brandon will get the show on the road. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Peter, and good morning to everyone, and welcome to the Worcester Business Journal and Worcester Regional Chamber of Commerce 2012 Economics Forecast event. So we're going to hear from our panelists this morning, and before each of them present, I'll describe them briefly, but there is also a biography of each of the panelists in your program. Now, as Peter mentioned, instead of taking questions verbally, there are index cards on the table, so if you get a chance and you have a question, feel free to write that down, and we'll have someone come around and collect those. And all the cards will be picked up around 9:15. So Ted Lapres is going to be our first presenter. Ted is the president and CEO of the international plastics manufacturer Nipro Incorporated, which is headquartered in Clinton. He's held the position since 2002, but he's been with Nipro for more than 24 years. During that time, the company has grown from about $80 million to a $1.2 billion in annual revenues. And the company now has operations in 14 countries. Ted?
Thank you, Brandon. Thank you, Peter. It's a real pleasure for me to have a chance to speak here today and at the Economic Forecast Forum, and I'm really also looking forward to hearing other speakers. And my first caveat is we're in manufacturing, we're not in economics, so I'm not professing to make any predictions or forecasts about the economy either globally or nationally. But as you know, being a manufacturer and operating around the world does give us some different perspectives, and I'll try and share some of those perspectives. Brandon touched on it, but most of you know Nipro or have heard of us. We're headquartered 25 minutes from here in Clinton. We've been there since 1955. We have about 17,000 employees now worldwide, around 4,000 that are in the U.S., and probably about 900 in Massachusetts, almost entirely in Clinton. We're coming up on our 15th year as a 100% employee-owned company, and it's something we're very proud of. It kind of defines our culture and our DNA and the passion in running our businesses. Brandon mentioned we have 41 locations around in about 14 countries, about 30 molding or tool building operations, and a series of product development and customer offices also around the world. Per Plastics News, we're the 6th largest plastics injection molder in the U.S. And during this time, we've grown into a large integrated contract manufacturer with a lot of capabilities beyond just molding, automation expertise, decorative, a whole series of different things. This kind of shows our sales growth from the mid-'90s. If you went back earlier, even to the early '90s, it was even down around 80 million. You can see we've had nice growth during this time, and we're now exceeding about 1.2 billion. But you also see there's a little bit of a plateauing effect that's happened in the last several years. Some of it, I think, relates to the unique challenges we have in the sectors we're in. But I also think it's a little bit indicative of the overall economic situation since 2008, 2009, whose overhang I think we and others still feel. Often I've heard in the last several years that flat is the new normal. We feel some of that it feels harder to sustain above average growth even though there's been a pickup since 2008 and 2009. It just feels a bit more challenging. From a regional perspective, this kind of shows where our sales are made up. We're heavily in the Americas, including Mexico, and Asia, where we have 3 large presence, and we've been there for almost 20 years. We're also in India and Singapore, and we have 4 operations in Europe. So it does give us a little bit of a unique perspective in those different markets, particularly our long experience in China. But being a employee-owned company where all your stockholders are U.S. employees, we're passionate about making sure we're growing our business here and in other parts of the U.S. We moved from a very matrix structure serving many markets a number of years ago to a much more focused global business unit structure several years ago. We really target 3 distinct markets: the consumer electronics space, largely in the handheld devices, the healthcare space, and packaging. And our customers are the large OEMs, Fortune 500 type companies that are leaders in those different spaces, companies like Research in Motion, Procter & Gamble, Unilever, Eli Lilly. And at any point in time, being a contract manufacturer, we're very concentrated. We're maybe 30 customers will make up 80% of our sales. So a lot of our insights are really through our customers onto their end markets, their patients, their consumers, and so forth. Just a few quick slides on this. In the healthcare, we focus on 3 submarkets: drug delivery, insulin pens, inhaler devices, things like that. Diagnostics would be the high volume consumable pipettes, cuvettes, things like that serve the diagnostic space. And then general surgical, med-surg can be enteral feeding and IV sets and the like. In the packaging area, we're serving companies like Procter & Gamble, Unilever, SC Johnson with deodorant canisters, baby wipe tubs, all kinds of various types of consumer products. Coca-Cola is a large and growing customer for us with their new dispensing system that has a plastics solution as part of it. And then in the consumer electronics, it's been largely, our growth has largely been serving the companies like Motorola, Nokia, Research and Motion, but we're really trying to diversify too into some areas like cosmetics and some of the emerging tech, clean tech technologies and so forth. So that's kind of just a quick run through on the company. We had several questions just trying to tee up. We asked to kind of give a little bit of an overall assessment on the economy, and I've deferred definitely to Tim much more. But thinking globally first, China, where we're very active, clearly seems to be cooling off some from what we've seen, but cooling off means maybe 5 to 7% growth versus 8 to 10%. We're in India. We have a partner that's tied to the Tata Group, and our partner was in last week, and he was telling us that India had kind of 9% growth, but now is coming down to about 7%. They feel that's a slowdown, but obviously by our standards, it's fairly robust growth. And I was in Brazil this summer, and the same thing, really go. China, I'll just add a little bit more because it's such a big presence for us, and we all have to be cognizant of it. It's a lot of interesting things going on there. Really escalating wage rates, 20% plus a year in all kind of, many key parts of the country, particularly on the eastern side. The renminbi strengthening has put a lot of pressure on the exports. How they enforcing regulations is very unpredictable and changing in all different parts of the different regions, which makes it difficult for companies to try and react on how they handle kind of environmental or overtime laws or things like this. So it's more and more difficult, I think companies are finding, to do business there, but you have to. But it does lead to some things like I think there's more migration to other regions in the Southeast Asia area. But I'm kind of cautiously optimistic. It's also leading to some things migrating back to the Americas, and we're starting to see certain types of opportunities there where our customers want us to come up with a solution locally. You still have to, the growth, there's so much growth in different parts of the world, you have to be reacting to that, but I think there's still opportunities for us in manufacturing here. I did see Europe. It's a little bit more difficult for me to see any encouraging signs there. We're not as big a presence, but I can only go by what I've read, and we seem to have fewer opportunities emerging of new products and things like that in Europe. The U.S. to us seems like it's recovering, but it feels modest. As I said, our visibility is primarily through the markets we serve. So something like appliances, which we do some work in, and that's tied largely to housing starts. It plummeted in the 2008 period. And while it's come back some, we've never really seen a sustained growth in the appliance sector, which is kind of indicative of what's happening in the housing sector. And from a regional perspective, it's a bit harder for me to kind of assess that. Our customers that we're serving here in Massachusetts really are located in other parts of the U.S., so I can't assess as well. But anecdotally, it does feel like hiring's picking up. The types of we get, obviously we're well known, so we get a lot of our people, get lots of calls, and I think it just feels like there's more kind of hiring activity going on, which could be a good sign. We deal with a lot of smaller startups, and it seems like there's a reasonable level of activity going on with that. In Clinton, our operations in the molding and design services are all showing growth this year. So we're not blockbuster growth, but growth. So we feel a little bit, cautiously optimistic about it. These are just some stats. Since we are in the plastic sector, we get from either things like the Federal Reserve or the Society of Plastics Industry, maybe 4 to 6% they're projecting. Mold making, which has been a big staple in this region, and the U.S. has been somewhat flat, but I think we're expecting a little bit of growth. And medical plastics, we're a little more optimistic. So there may be a little bit of optimism in some of these areas, but it's, the 4 to 6% is hard to, I'm not sure that we're going to exactly see that. We're also kind of asked to look at key industry trends, and for us, that's a little bit more complex from my perspective, because we're in plastics, as I said. We're a contract manufacturer, and we're playing significantly across a bunch of different markets. And so the big trends playing out as you cut across all those different areas really varies, and they're not all the same, so I can't summarize easily. But a few things, clearly, needless to say, the global competition keeps increasing. It isn't new, but it's all moving in one direction. We're seeing more and more fierce competitors evolving out of China, evolving out of some of the other emerging markets. And then we're seeing the size and scale of some of the significant players in the contract manufacturing space getting even more formidable. A company called Hanhai or Foxconn is a $50 billion company out of Taiwan and China. They make all the iPhones and iPads, and they're just they have factories the size of cities. But companies even U.S. based like Jabil and Flextronics have kind of grown to 20 to 30 billion, 10, 20 times our size to kind of meet the demand of their competitor, meet the challenge of companies like Foxconn. And so smaller, nimbler contract manufacturers like ourselves, we don't have that scale, but we really have to kind of react in a lot of different ways with innovation, with speed, with a lot of things to try and compete. In the plastic space, clearly the whole sustainability push is a critical trend, particularly with the consumer brand companies. Procter & Gamble has set very bold goals for the next 10 years, and companies like Unilever and Coke are all exactly the same. And it has clear implications for the plastic sector. Things obviously like recycling, but alternative material solutions, how we design products. So it's a major trend. Fortunately, we're the only molder on Procter & Gamble's Sustainability Council, so it helps. We want to try and get the insight through our customers and react. The convergence of applications on smart devices, you all know. You can see it from your smartphones, but even in the medical space, we're seeing more and more convergence on smart devices. Electronics are going to be key. And then the unique trends in each of our markets. And for us in the healthcare space, there's a lot of patent cliff issues, Pfizer losing a big patent, Eli Lilly, GSK, and the pharma companies have to react in different ways. They're obviously trying to find new drugs, but they're putting a lot more cost pressure both on their own internal operations and their suppliers. We're also letting go a lot of R&D, so we find opportunities. So it's opportunity where there might be outsourcing. There's a challenge in meeting their different cost demands than prior years, but the opportunity is they might be outsourcing more in the healthcare space than before and outsourcing more R&D type work. Consumer packaging, and for us, is a lot about helping those companies with the moment of truth, as P&G says, when it's on the shelf and how your product looks. The wireless trend is just all these different devices, obviously the tablets, the e-readers. You have to be ready to react to all these new types of devices that are coming out and pervasive. How has the soft economy affected NIPRO is another question that we were asked. You saw on the earlier slide that our sales growth has kind of flattened a bit in the past several years. Some of it is tied to the economy, like I said, in things like the appliance sector. Some of it's tied to the volatility in the markets we serve. But the soft economy clearly creates some level of excess capacity, putting greater and greater margin on companies like us. You have largely the same set of competitors chasing some fewer opportunities. So we see in clear areas of spaces we're at that is more and more competitive, the pricing and what people are willing to take business on for. And in the old adage of skating to where the puck is, we're seeing more of our competitors moving into the healthcare space, which traditionally had a fewer group of players that had very high barriers to entry. But companies that maybe stumbled in consumer industrial or automotive have added, try to get into the healthcare space. And those larger companies that I mentioned have really stepped up their medical divisions. And the private equity groups we see getting more and more actively into helping smaller healthcare companies roll up into bigger ones. So there's a lot of moving into that space that we've been for a while, and we have to be ready to react to that. But those are all kind of tough challenges, I said, and my perspective is it doesn't do you any good to talk about those things that could have a negative effect on your business without talking about how you respond to it. Clearly, as many of you know, you have to have a fanatical approach to kind of the operational effectiveness, lean manufacturing. We put a lot of effort into that with the kind of the black belts we have and green belts, not just within our own factories, but it's really much more now working with our customers on how do you kind of find efficiencies in the whole supply chain from their centers to your centers, the warehouse distribution. And you have to have, and as you have heard many times, you have to have a real focus on innovation and investment in technology. And if I don't have the time here to talk about the types of programs that we've won in the last several years, but every one of them really was rooted in some innovative or creative solution that we brought to our customer that helped us stand out. And you have to have that if you want to survive. We were asked to talk about some areas that we see growth. The broader dynamics of healthcare is clearly a lot happening, trying to understand the healthcare legislation and so forth. But in our more narrow world, we're big in the insulin pen area and serving really all the major players there. Unfortunately, that's a growth area as the diabetes epidemic is now starting to go much more global in China and India and so forth. So there's going to, all of our customers are projecting that that's an area of growth. There's a lot of activity in the drug delivery area, drug delivery devices, in part because of the things I mentioned before, in part with a lot of generic drugs coming on, how you deliver these new drugs. It creates opportunities, much more great opportunities in the diagnostic point of care. More personalized diagnostics is a big trend that we're involved with, and we see more opportunities. Consumer packaging, while it's a slower growth here in the U.S., is clearly higher growth in the rest of the world. But it's also how you can take share away. How the package looks is so increasingly important, and so we have a lot of effort we put into our design services to go into companies and and try and help them package or position their products going forward. And new markets for us. So while wireless has been our biggest driver, we're seeing things like the solid state lighting area in green tech. We're doing some interesting areas work in some of the parts of the solar space and so forth in solid state lighting. So we do see opportunities even in a slower growth market. And then I just wanted to end on one final note, somewhat tied to the forum, but I think it's more in a general sense too. I'm a firm believer that we need a strong manufacturing base in the U.S. if we want to have a solid economy. And obviously we've had great erosion of manufacturing jobs, over the past decade or more, both in our state, our region, and on a national basis. And my view is a trend that we need to reverse as a country. We were asked this fall to attend a regional forum of the Federal Advanced Manufacturing Initiative kicked off by the Obama administration, chaired by the MIT president, Susan Hockfield, and the Dow Chemical CEO, Andrew Liveris. So it was real eye-opener to be part of that. In turn, Massachusetts launched a comparable advanced manufacturing initiative to bring even greater focus in our state, piggybacking the federal one. Neither of those initiatives can lead to easy answers, but we have to make an effort. And we hosted the Massachusetts one in November, and I spoke to that group at the time. And my message was pretty simple, that we've been around 57 years here in Massachusetts. We're as vibrant now as we've ever been here in Massachusetts. It's not easy, but we've had good, solid growth. It doesn't come easy, but we've done it through a wide range of things. There's no one thing. We have to invest in state-of-the-art technology, the best molding machines, automation, and so forth. We've done it through that. We've done it through forming a lot of partnerships. Our design companies were partnerships. Our mold building, we're done with partnerships. We've done it with seeking out new technologies emanating out of places like MIT. You know, we're working on a beta project with a very innovative company in automation called Heartland Robots. We did some work with antimicrobial coatings with an MIT outfit. So there's a lot of them out there, these little technology startups. We're collaborating closely with UMass Lowell and the plastics group there. So there's this whole area of what I call the ecosystem of supporting a sector. And what I said to the group is we need the types of programs, initiatives, and policies that support the ecosystem of a sector like plastics, not just one company. So I don't have easy answers on it, but I hope we can make progress with that group. And so that's what I wanted to end with. You know, just to conclude, I see the landscape being challenging. The robustness of the economy is not entirely clear. Volatility is the norm. But I do think that opportunities are out there for people to take advantage of. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Ted. Next, we're going to hear from John Mahoney. John is the Vice Chairman and Chief Financial Officer of international retail giant Staples, which is headquartered out in Metro West in Framingham. In that capacity, Mr. Mahoney oversees $25 billion in operations of the company, which operates in 26 countries across the globe. Prior to working at Staples, he was a partner at Ernst & Young, and he has an active Worcester connection, serving as a trustee for the College of the Holy Cross. Mr. Mahoney.
Thanks very much, Brandon. Good morning, everybody. It's great to be here. You know, people see my name and they think the pronunciation is difficult. To, you know, remind you that Irish are a little difficult to understand. Reminds me, you know, they don't actually behave the way everybody else did a lot of the time. Reminds me of a wedding I was at in Ireland not so long ago, a few months ago. The priest getting up to give the blessing looked around all the wonderful families that had been there for so long and said, "Could everybody please go stand next to the person who has brought meaning to your life?" The bartender was nearly trampled. So I thought, in thinking about this, like Ted, I don't really have a great ability to predict the economy. And I was sort of thinking about how do we think about the economy and you know, how I could be helpful to you in understanding how the economy may affect your businesses. And I guess it reminds me of the fact that the Fed calls around and does this Beige Book survey every quarter. And I get called for that every quarter from the Federal Reserve in Boston to provide input for the Boston region's report, which makes it clear that the Fed clearly can't have any idea what's going to happen in the economy if they're asking me where the economy is going. But I guess the way they think about it is that sort of mosaic of opinions of a lot of different people. It's like, you know, crowd theory. You can get an understanding of the economy that comes from taking a lot of different points of view and images and samples to be able to determine that. So with that in mind, I thought that I might talk a little bit about, first of all, I'll give you a little background on who Staples is and where we've come from. Then talk a little bit about some of the things that are driving our business in the near term. Focus it on Massachusetts for just a couple of minutes, and then talk about you know, our view of some of the indicators we think impact our business, and hopefully that'll give you a little better sense of how our little sample size of the economy affects your businesses as well. So, all right, there it is. Okay, so as all of you have heard from the Republican presidential primaries, Staples began in 1986 as the godchild of Mitt Romney. But we did open our first store in Brighton, Massachusetts in 1986 in May. And we've been focused on the small business customer. That's been really the strength of our business. At the time we started, we were solely a retail business. Tom Stenberg, our founder, believed that anything that we did that added to our cost structure was going to be a competitive disadvantage, so we wanted to have completely no frills. I think credit to him, listening to customers, we recognized that delivery was very important in our industry, and so we began to deliver sometime after that. Today we have over 2,000 stores. We are the world's largest. We do about $25 billion in sales. It's now 40% retail and 60% is delivery. We have about 90,000 associates, and we're in about 26 countries, depending on whether Taiwan's a country or not. Our business units are divided between our delivery hub business, North American retail, which is the U.S. and Canada, and our international operations. So they're 10 billion, 10 billion, and 5 billion, rough and tough, for each of the businesses. We've seen decent growth in the delivery business, which is, I think an indication of share gain more than anything else. We do operate in 3 segments there. We have a separate brand called Quill, which we acquired in 1998, and it operates out of Chicago. And then we have our contract business, which is the Salesforce-driven component of the business that Salesforce calls on medium to large-size companies. And then Staples.com, which is our public website that's really direct to small businesses. We are the second biggest web commerce company in the world to Amazon, which is a little-known fact about Staples, but we do about 90% of our delivery sales are done on the web. Our North American retail business has been growing a little bit slower. We have a little over 1,900 stores in the U.S. and Canada. But we've started to see, growth improve somewhat during 2011. And then our international business is probably our most challenging segment in that it's very difficult to bring. Many retailers in the U.S. have had not great success outside the United States. We've had periods of success in Germany and the U.K. in particular, and we're really just getting going in markets like China, Brazil, and in India. So what are a couple of the trends that are driving our business? Well, first of all, I mentioned the shift from retail to delivery. We made some of that shift happen with the way we've invested in acquisitions and other things. And we've found that in the core office supplies categories, we're gaining share. We've had, as we've grown, we've had a lot more buying power versus our vendors, and we've therefore been able to buy a little bit better. We think we're the low-cost producer, so that's allowed us to gain quite a bit of share over the last several years. In order to sustain our growth, however, we need to grow beyond office supplies. So we've gotten into categories like facilities and break room, and we're certainly seeing, as Ted said, technology is really becoming the key productivity driver for most of our customers, and therefore we're trying to do a better job serving them by both having new products like book readers and tablets and PCs, and this year it'll be Ultrabooks, but also providing the services to support that. Our customers tell us that it isn't just a matter of buying the commodity hardware today, it's the total cost of ownership, it's the issues surrounding problems with making technology work for their companies, and so we've added services that we think will be a really good source of growth for us, but most importantly, it helps our customers be more successful. So, how have we done over the last few years? We've actually had pretty solid performance. Sales haven't grown a lot, but earnings and cash flows have been strong. 2009 was a terrible year for most companies. Our cash flow was particularly strong, somewhat because of some of the activity that was connected with our acquisition of Corporate Express, about an $8 billion company. We had a lot of tax loss carry-forwards that accelerated our cash flow. But you can see we've been pretty steadily about $1 billion or more in free cash flow over the last several years. So not a lot of fun to try and control your expenses and to do the things you need to make sure that you maintain strong operating earnings and cash flows. But overall, with a slow growth environment, we feel pretty proud of the success we've achieved over the last several years. So just zeroing in on Massachusetts for a minute, You can see that we employ about 5,600 associates in Massachusetts. We've added about 100 jobs in each of the last 3 years. We have 76 stores in Massachusetts, doing about $300 million in sales. We do about $250 million in delivery sales in Massachusetts. And you can see just in and around this area, we have a number of stores. I hope all of you know where they are. If you don't, please find them and buy something. You know, we did start in Massachusetts, and our strategy really has been to cluster stores in a market before we move on to the next market. So I think Massachusetts is a good example of that. You can see our store footprint, which we believe is important to have a convenient store network. It's pretty strong in Massachusetts. Our sales trends in our delivery business were you know, in the same vicinity as the sales trends we saw throughout the rest of the country. In our retail business, we saw sales a little bit better than they were around the rest of the country. We think that comes from several factors, one of which is that our retail stores, our traffic from small business customers has been down over the period of this recession and the fallout that's come after that. As we've seen small business formation less robust than it had been. Small business is having a hard time getting capital. Small business reacts very quickly. If there's a problem, it's their checkbook that's suffering, and so people don't want to take as much in the way of risks. So our business in stores has been a little bit more oriented towards the consumer, and you can see that some of the big drivers that have impacted consumers across the country have been a little bit less significant in Massachusetts. So the share of homes with negative equity is about 15% below the 22.5% average across the country. And you can see that unemployment in Massachusetts at about 6% is below the 8.5% or so that the national average is as of today. So we think that we've taken opportunities where we can in Massachusetts and sold more to consumers during this period of time, but that is not our bread and butter. So other than home equity and unemployment, what else do we take a look at as we try and predict where our business is going? We do look at GDP, we look at industrial production, we look at small business optimism and CEO confidence. We also take a look at, you know, I mentioned unemployment, but we look at white-collar employment growth as a critical factor. Office supplies has tended to grow along with the need to seek productivity on behalf for businesses because the tools that they get, whether it's technology or other supplies, tends to drive more productivity for office workers. And so we see white-collar growth as a very important part of that. I guess we also thought I'd comment briefly on some of the things that government does that impact us. The Main Street Fairness Act, which is the term that has been used for equalizing the playing field for sales tax. You know, Amazon doesn't charge sales tax in most states around the country today, and that gives them a pretty substantial advantage versus someone that does, like Staples does. And so we're very anxious to see the playing field leveled there. We'd like to see the payroll tax and unemployment benefits extension in 2011. That was very helpful last year, and I think trying to keep stimulus in the pockets of customers is important to us. The Wall Street reform is very important. The Bank of America folks won't like us saying that the Durbin Amendment is something that we're interested in, but what that represents is an amendment that requires banks not to charge the same kind of exchange fees on debit and credit cards that they used to, based on the fact that their costs are much lower than the fees they charge. That was one of the things that did come out of Dodd-Frank, and you know, it's sort of the balance of power between the retailers and the financial services companies. Healthcare reform is something that we're watching very closely. How the Obama healthcare legislation actually gets implemented over the next several years is very important. You know, read recently that we don't really have a spending problem in the federal government, we have a healthcare problem. If you look at the percentage of the deficit that's coming from healthcare spending, it's disproportionate and it's growing much faster. So if we could control healthcare spending, it would be very important. I guess we have some concern that many companies are just going to abandon healthcare and let the government take care of it. And I'm concerned that that will drive costs higher for the economy as a whole. A couple of other brief pieces of legislation I'm not going to talk much about, but hiring incentives is another thing that we think is very important because, as I mentioned, headcount's important to our growth overall. And then Consumer Product Safety Act is another thing that we think is important to create an environment for businesses to be able to grow. So, we think that overall we're slightly optimistic as we come into 2012. We see over the last part of 2011, we've seen a little bit of an improvement in both small business confidence and in traffic in our stores. So we're hoping that that will continue in 2012. I have to be, we're not as good at predicting as some of the members of the audience who won the prizes for the economic indicators, because we thought that the trends we saw towards the end of 2010 were going to carry over into 2011, and we really saw a break in the trend in early 2011, and our year was not nearly as good as we thought. So, I hope that can give you at least a little bit of a data point as you think about how the economy is going to affect your own businesses as we get into 2012. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, John. And last, we're going to hear from Robert McGee. And just a reminder, if you have any questions, we do have those index cards, which of course we bought at Staples. So feel free to write down those questions, and we'll be collecting those soon. Mr. McGee is the Director of Macro Strategy and Research at U.S. Trust, which is part of Bank of America's Private Wealth Management Division. He also serves on the Investment Strategy Committee and has been named one of the nation's top economic forecasters multiple times. He spent time writing and studying economic trends in Japan and has taught at Florida State and New York universities, and he earned his master's and PhD from the University of Wisconsin. Mr. McGee.
Good morning, everybody. I also have some Worcester connections. My inclination is to say Worcester, but my son and his family who live here always correct me, so I know I should say Worcester, right? But you might have noticed I was limping. I came up on the weekend so I could take my grandson skiing up at Wachusett, and we had a great day. I skied for about 6 hours, and I should have stopped at 5 because at the end of the day I fell down and sprained my ankle. So that's why I'm limping. I also had a tie when I came up here, but I think one of my grandsons must be wearing it to school today because I couldn't find it when I got dressed. I hadn't worn a suit for quite a while. So let's just briefly say a little bit about Massachusetts. I want to talk about long-term trends. I'm going to give a forecast. Like John, at the end of 2010, we thought 2011 was going to carry on some momentum that had developed. But a few events intervened that show the difficulty of forecasting, because you can forecast based on what you see happening in economic fundamentals, a lot of which has been discussed here. But there are always surprises. And in 2011, we got the surprise the Japanese tsunami had an impact. The strength in late 2010 was global in nature, and it caused oil prices to go up. And when gasoline got to $4, consumers didn't have extra money to spend on other things, so they cut back. And then the European crisis, which has been a disaster in the making for quite a while. I used to work at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. My academic specialty was monetary policy, and I've been appalled at the way the European Central Bank has conducted policy until recently, when the new leader of the ECB has actually started doing some constructive things, which in my opinion is the reason we're seeing the financial markets start to look better. Okay, but I didn't talk about Massachusetts, and I said I would. My son lives in North Brookfield. I think they used to manufacture a lot of shoes there. My predecessor at U.S. Trust, which manages money for high net worth individuals, did a dissertation at Yale about the New England textile industry. Things have changed in the last 100 years. Things are always changing. And I want to talk about the two big trends that are causing change to accelerate and be even faster as we move into the future. There's a very good edition of Foreign Affairs, the January-February edition, looks at the last 90 years. I guess it's the 90th anniversary of Foreign Affairs. And it's fun to go back. They have a lot of the old articles looking at global events at the time. And what's striking, let's just stick to the economy. The 1930s, because of the Depression, people thought that communism was the wave of the future. The intelligentsia, the media people who were supposed to know everything, talked about why a planned economy was the wave of the future. This general viewpoint continued as Russia got to space first. And in the 70s, particularly before Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan came along, we saw a deterioration in the market economies, and there was still a belief in the ascendance of the planned economies. The emerging markets basically didn't commit to one view or another. And so they had their foot in both philosophies. And then basically the Soviet Union blew up. China realized they wouldn't get out of the Stone Age unless they adopted a market economy, which they did in the late 70s. They started the process that's caused their growth rate to average 9% since then. And then in the 80s, you know, the U.S. was in decline because Japan was on the rise. Lester Thoreau at MIT near here was writing books about, you know, why the Japanese model was superior to the American model. And I was at a Japanese bank, as he mentioned. I've you know, spent some time in Japan and understand a little bit about their situation. But they blew up in the 90s. There hasn't been any growth in Japan for 20 years now. So, of course, everybody's always talking about why the U.S. is in decline and somebody else is taking over, and now it's China. Okay, that's not likely to happen, in my opinion, for the same reason none of the other things worked out. And that's because of the resilience of the U.S. economy. I don't have time to go into all the advantages that the U.S. has, but essentially the advantage boils down to the fact that we have we are a model or microcosm of the global economy in our country. And the globalization process that's occurring, that's one of the two big forces that is causing things to change. It's behind income inequality, for example. That globalization process is being unfolding in a way that is very in sympathy with the way U.S. corporations work. U.S. corporations are global leaders in a disproportionate way. The U.S. is just 5% of the world's population. We produce 20 to 25% of world output, depending on when you measure it and how you adjust exchange rates. That's exactly the same as it was back in 1980 when this globalization process started. And despite the fact that the doom and gloomsters have been predicting the decline of the U.S. Forever. So I'm the little boy that thinks there's a pony under all this manure. But, you know, if the pony's under a big pile of manure, it's kind of a messy job to get to it, right? So we've got a lot of work to do to get there. But the two big trends that are driving the global economy and the U.S. economy, and the U.S. economy in many ways is leading the global economy, globalization and technology. Now, if you've read any of the literature on technological change and how it's influencing things, we know that technology is accelerating. One aspect of that is Moore's law, so that information processing is gathering power at an accelerating rate. And the acceleration of technology is significant for the economy because technology is one of the main drivers of the productivity in the economy. And there are two things that make an economy grow. One is productivity, and the other one is people. So the more people you have with the more productivity, the faster your economy grows. And the U.S. economy, the advantage of the U.S. economy is that we've shown over a long period of time a capacity to adapt to change more quickly than other cultures. Okay, I worked in a Japanese bank. The Japanese have a much more frictional cultural environment that slows down their ability to adjust to rapid change. We're seeing in Europe right now evidence of their historical tendency to be slower to adapt to change. So of the major rich market economies, the U.S. is the one that has shown the most capacity and resilience to adjusting to change. Now, nobody likes change. If you try to change the workplace, we all know that everybody's going to complain. So it's not like Americans like change. It's just that the American business sector adjusts to change more quickly, has a better capacity to adjust to change than a lot of other major cultures. Now, there are other countries where that's true too, but what's significant about the U.S. is we're a very big country. We're the biggest economy in the world. We're the most productive economy in the world. If we have 5% of the world's people producing 20% or more of the world's output, that by itself tells you that we've got 4 times or more the average level of productivity in the world. So the U.S. is on the leading edge of technology. A lot of what you heard about these companies, the evolution that they're going through is their ability to adapt technology, logistics, state-of-the-art knowledge into their business plans in a way that keeps them from going the way of the buggy whip or the companies that we don't hear about anymore. So the U.S. is evolving just like everybody else, but it has more capacity for evolution in its business sector. Now, clearly we've got problems. The most obvious one is we've got a dysfunctional political system. And we'll see if the election resolves any of that. But clearly that's an impediment that could be changed to help and solve some of the problems like health care, which is by far the biggest question that we have for our future because we don't know how we're going to pay for all the entitlements that have been promised in the health care arena. So technology, Francis Fukuyama in this edition of Foreign Affairs has a sentence that I've been using as a quote. And the basic sentence is, it says, will the developed economies, the rich parts of the world, will globalization and technological change continue to mean that fewer and fewer people can be middle class? Okay, so let me talk a little bit about this issue of the 1% and the 99. and the fact there's no doubt that globalization is causing income inequality to increase. There have been 30 years, basically, of this globalization process where the communist world and the underdeveloped economies have been transitioning toward models that are much closer to what these gentlemen use in conducting their business, a market economy as opposed to a planned economy. And one of the things that's happened as a result from, say, the pessimistic boy would tell you that this means more and more Americans are being crowded out of good-paying jobs because there are billions of people in India and China who are moving into middle-class status, and they'll work for a fraction of what American middle-class, blue-collar workers enjoyed during the 50s and 60s and into the 70s before these things started to change. The optimistic boy would tell you, well, that's true about a small fraction of the world's population, but in the last 15 years, there's been an unprecedented movement of massive hundreds of millions of people out of subsistence poverty into middle-class existence. This has been primarily in Asia, but we're at the launching point where it's going to start happening in Africa as well. Because if these underdeveloped economies get their acts together, the way China has, for example, in raising living standards, then the technology is out there. The productivity techniques are out there. And if you take somebody who's been working as a subsistence farmer in China and you move them into a factory with state-of-the-art technology, their productivity goes up by factors of 100. Their wages can go up by factors up to that point, and they can move into middle-class status. So this is what globalization is doing. It's making what we've enjoyed in the rich part of the world available to everybody else. And less than 20% of the world's people live in the rich part of the world. The vast majority live in the poor part of the world, and they're moving into a more advanced economy with higher living standards. So if you look at the income inequality problem in the United States, you've got the vast majority of the population, which has been thrown into competition with most of the world's 7 billion people. If you look at the top quintile in the United States, the people that have college educations, one of the statistics that surprised me last week when I was looking at employment statistics is that there are more people working with college degrees today than there were at the peak of the last recovery. So for people with college degrees, the recovery has occurred in jobs. We set a record in December for jobs for people with college degrees. Okay, but if you look at people without a college degree, we're still several million jobs short of where we were at the top of the last recovery. And this is emblematic of this globalization pressure on the lower quintiles versus the upper quintiles. The upper quintile in the United States is a very small part of the world's population. When they're competing just in the US population, they're a much bigger percentage than in the global population. Because in the global population, there are a smaller percentage of people with the kind of human capital that people have in the United States in the top quintile, and the skills, physical capital, financial capital. There's a disproportionate amount of the world's wealth in the United States. By some measures, we have about 30% of the world's financial wealth. We're 5% of the world's people. So the people that have that wealth to deploy around the world, the people who have the skills, the kids that drop out of college to start Facebook or Google or whatever, those models are being put onto a 7 billion person platform as opposed to the old just 5% of the world's population. And that means the returns to them are incredible. Athletes, entertainers, they're on a global stage now to a much greater extent. So we're seeing the incomes of people with these blessed endowments increase much more rapidly than they ever have in history. Yogi Berra lives down the street from where I live in New Jersey. When he played baseball, the sort of market for baseball players was such that he never saw the incredible wealth that the players that are operating in global markets today are getting. So that's an example of this change to a global marketplace and how the leverage on the global economy makes it possible for the 1% to see their incomes and wealth grow much more rapidly than it used to, whereas the other people are thrown into this competition with the vast masses of the world's population. Okay, now I'm supposed to talk about forecasting, and you notice I don't have a presentation, and that can be dangerous. So let me, but just to wrap that up, these are the big trends that are driving things. This is the environment that businesses have to adjust to. And no other country has the brands, the technology, the leading edge innovation that the United States has. Other countries are competitive with us. But the United States is a major beneficiary of globalization. But it has created this issue that's moved to the forefront of the political debate. And one of the obvious implications of this is we need to get more and more of our population with college degrees or specific training that's more relevant. They need to have more versatility, more adaptability, because the evolution of technology is going exponential, and this means change is happening faster and faster. And people don't like change, but we're going to have to deal with it, and we're seeing that happen in spades. The creative destruction, for example, that Apple and all the information technology is doing makes it impossible to sit and keep things the way they are. That was never a good business strategy, but it's increasingly, the amount of time you get to sit is shorter and shorter. Okay, so I'm supposed to end at 9:20, so I should spend 5 minutes on the forecast. Okay, one of the implications of globalization and the fact that it spread to the emerging markets is that the world is growing faster on average than it used to grow. So what that means is that the world's growth rate used to be about 3%. In the last 20 years, it's picked up to about a 4% trend growth rate. That's because the emerging markets average over 6% growth, and they're accounting for an increasing proportion of growth. Japan stopped growing. Europe barely grows 1%. The U.S. growth rate on a trend basis is about 2.5 to 3. Okay, in 2007 and 8, we had the worst recession since the 1930s. Global growth went negative for the first time in the post-war period. In 2010, thanks to all of the policy response around the world, monetary and fiscal, global growth picked up to 5%, which is way above trend. As that stimulus wore off, as some of these shocks that I talked about in 2011 occurred, growth started to slow down. Growth slowed down in the emerging markets because they tightened monetary policy because their inflation problem was the big problem. That's changing. In the last 3 months, we've seen over 50 examples of monetary policy easing in countries like Brazil, Thailand last week. China has gone from tightening to easing. So in the emerging markets, we think the slowdown that occurred over the course of 2011 is in the process of bottoming out, and in the second half, emerging markets will be growing again at a faster rate because they have an easy fix. They tighten monetary policy, they can ease it as inflation comes down, and their growth will pick up. So for example, China's likely to make its low point for momentum in the first or second quarter and then start picking up. The Chinese stock market's already telling you that. It leads, and the Chinese stock market had a horrible year last year as China slowed down. It's one of the best performing this year because the stock market is anticipating this pickup. In the U.S., most of our slowdown was due to temporary factors, the spike in gasoline over $4, the Japanese tsunami, its impact on supply chains, the Thai floods, and the European crisis, which in the summer until about October, there was a growing fear that Europe was going to blow up the way that the U.S. financial system blew up and caused the global recession in 2008. When the new ECB leader came in, he's much more enlightened. He went to MIT. His professor was Stanley Fischer, who's now the head of the Bank of Israel, the man that trained Ben Bernanke, who, thank God, knew what to do in the crisis we've been in. So this goes back to Massachusetts. You have an enormous competitive advantage in Massachusetts because you have the world's best knowledge industries. These guys are just one example of how that's happened. And I should say manufacturing in the United States is coming back. Okay, it's the most productive in the world. It's increasingly related to technology. But as you probably know, if you've been in a factory lately, where there used to be 1,000 workers, now you have 50 guys using a lot of computer stuff to run the factory. So what we've seen in the last 40 years is manufacturing jobs in the U.S. have gone like this. Manufacturing output's gone like that. Exact same thing that happened to agriculture over 100 years ago. A few farmers can produce way more than 20 times the number of farmers were able to produce back then. Okay, so in the United States, the manufacturing sector, let me talk about this recovery in the minute I have. This recovery, we talk about it being slow, but it's really a mixed bag. In the corporate sector, earnings have hit records. Okay, it's been a stronger than normal earnings recovery. It's been a stronger than normal manufacturing recovery. Alan Greenspan used to say every business cycle's the same except for what's different. That's one of his famous cryptic statements, but it's true. There's a pattern to the business cycle. This one's following a lot of the pattern, but the things that are different are the reasons why it's slow. Housing, this is the first recovery without housing. Now, housing has been bottoming for several years now, and it will eventually start picking up. State and local government spending is being cut back. The federal government's budget deficits need to be addressed. So the government sector is subtracting from GDP. If you look at the rest of the economy, the part that's not related directly to housing or to the government sector, what you'll see is an economy that's growing well over 3%, closer to 4%. So it's a mixed bag that gives us this overall malaise. Now, a lot of people work in the sectors that aren't performing, so the jobs recovery has been subpar. But in manufacturing, this jobs recovery, the cyclical recovery, has been stronger than in the last two cycles because the manufacturing sector is very plugged into this global economy. So I'm a minute over. The bottom line on the forecast is the world, which grew 5% in 2010, has slowed down to below trend, the trend being 4%. We think it'll bottom out in the first half of this year and start to pick up again. The U.S. relatively hasn't slowed as much, and we think it will continue to perform in the 2 to 3% range going forward. The U.S. stock market outperformed all the other stock markets in the world, except for some very small ones last year, by a wide margin. And that's because U.S. companies have continued to perform very well and are in a very solid competitive position to take advantage of the enormous opportunities that technological change and globalization are presenting for the people who can provide the goods and services that are going to bring the world's people out of poverty at the fastest rate in human history, which is what we've been doing for the last 10 years. So that's why I see the pony under the manure. I'll stop. Sorry about going over a little bit, and I'm sure you must have questions because I didn't really stick to the forecast too well. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much to all three of you. Now we're going to sort of transition into a little bit of a discussion here. So I think the way this is hopefully going to work, I'll try to direct some questions to each of the panelists. But if any of the other panelists want to add on to what someone else has said, feel free to let me know. And I also have some submitted questions, which hopefully we can get to as well. So I think we got a good overview of sort of a local manufacturing perspective, a retailer's perspective that operates in a global economy, as well as sort of a global economic and some domestic trends as well. So definitely some interesting insights here. I think the first question I'd like to ask is towards you, Ted, and it's about manufacturing in an international economy. President Obama sort of outlined a return to manufacturing as a key theme to his recent State of the Union address. And you had even mentioned this in your speech about perhaps a little bit of a migration back to some manufacturing into the U.S., given some challenges in the Asian markets. And we even heard Mr. McGee talking about manufacturing could be making a comeback as well. So do you think, what are the keys to making this promise a reality for bringing this domestic manufacturing back to the U.S., do you think?
Well, it's a little bit of what Tim said, and probably some of the things that I said, that you clearly need the technology and the automation. You might have heard that. I think President Obama was at Intel factory. It just opened up, just state of the art, totally huge investment, billions of dollars. So it's definitely going to be driven by technology and automation and very advanced manufacturing techniques, which is, as Tim says, I agree, it's not going to create as many of the jobs, but it has to be around really being at the cutting edge of the innovation and the technology.
Okay. Perhaps for you, John, can you talk a little bit about what some of the greatest challenges to operating a company in Massachusetts are, and some of the greatest advantages that come along with doing that as well?
Well, I think when people talk about locating in a particular place, they often talk about many of the tax incentives and many of those things. I always find that those are just they're the last thing that you need to consider. People are the biggest thing. Massachusetts has great people, great educational institutions, and so we've been very lucky in that we've been able to attract a very talented pool of people to our company in Massachusetts. I think that's the biggest advantage. I think in addition to that, the population density is also a big advantage. We do much better in places where there's good population density than we do in very remote markets. So I think those are probably the two biggest advantages. The disadvantages come, it is higher cost. Everything's higher cost here. We were talking about energy the other day, and we've done a lot to try and mitigate our energy costs with solar panels on the roofs of all of our fulfillment centers and using a lot of alternative energy and green energy. But energy is still higher in Massachusetts. So, I think Massachusetts needs to, to be successful, take advantage of the people resources we have. As I think Ted talked about innovation, smart people innovate much better than people that aren't as bright.
Please.
Yeah, I just add, the one other part of when I was talking about kind of the ecosystem or infrastructure, when you have an industry, say like plastics, there's so much know-how that's been built up over the processing knowledge, and mold building, for instance, was a great skill in this area. If you begin to lose those people and they're not being replenished, that's how an industry starts to seep away from a region like the textile example. So for us, I mean, it's really critical to be tied into great universities and educational places and trying to bring the next generation of great mold builders and molding processors, which clearly is a more sophisticated degree of education than maybe 25 years ago. So it does tie with what both Tim and John said. But if you lose that, then that whole industry begins to lose its relevance to a region, which is on our mind.
Right, right.
One of the interesting or ironic things about this recovery is we're hearing a lot, there's sort of a industrialization boom going on in the world because bringing people out of subsistence poverty means creating the old-fashioned industrialized output that gives people their first cars and houses and all of those things. And we're hearing a lot of industrial executives talking about their situation in the United States, like I heard the CEO of Siemens recently, talking about how they've got lots of job openings in the United States, but they're having a hard time filling them. So you've got this structural unemployment where a lot of people, maybe they had been riding on the housing real estate boom for a long time, and now that's over. But because of the very specific high technical content to the kind of jobs that are available out there, this mismatch means we need to make more and more effort to put people in a position where they can move into the jobs that are there in the manufacturing and industrial sector. And that means looking at how we educate workers, how we make them able to adapt to the changes that are going to be happening faster and faster as we move forward in this world.
If we could continue, Ted, if you don't mind talking, I'd like to ask you about sort of hiring. And I know you've talked about education and making sure we have qualified workers. I mean, when you're out there looking for workers to work in NIPRO, what's your view of, I mean, do you have an adequate skill set out there to be able to hire from, or where are the biggest lapses in that, do you think?
Well, as we said before, the equipment you're dealing with is so sophisticated now, so there clearly needs to be a higher degree of education and training. I think, you know, in places like we are in Clinton and some other probably urban settings, I think the immigrant community is important. You know, we kind of support a lot of English as a second language, you know, because it's so, you have to follow very strict protocol and regulatory procedures and kind of the medical, and so you have to have everything very well documented, and people have to be fluent in English to be able to do that. And when you're dealing in communities where there's a lot of immigrant communities, you have to make sure that the English is this, you know, that there's strong English to supplement the technical know-how you need. Is one thing I'd say.
Sure. Yeah, I know Governor Patrick has also discussed this in terms of trying to increase the role that community colleges can play. Do you see that as a role? I mean,
Yeah, very much so. One thing I guess I neglected a little bit. We have a NIPRO university we put in a long time ago, and it's offered training on all of our basic areas for everyone in Massachusetts, but for anyone around the NIPRO world. We also offer it up to other people in Massachusetts can get certified through our university. We put people through kind of scientific molding training. So there's we really knowledge sharing and using our university as a platform for extending the breadth of knowledge is one of the critical things that's helped our success.
Okay. Mr. McGee, if I get back to you with a little bit more of looking into that crystal ball into 2012, I think as you had mentioned, we saw a jump in the GDP in the fourth quarter of 2011, and various other macroeconomic indicators seem to improve towards the end of 2011. So, I mean, what expectations do you have for that into 2012, and specifically about Massachusetts and New England? What do you think regionally we can do to stay ahead of that curve and keep our position?
Well, I think your unemployment rate speaks for itself. I mean, it's lower than the national average. And when you look into the details of states with lower versus higher, what you see is the industry mix is the most important factor. So that's sort of prima facie evidence that you've got a superior mix to the average in the United States. And I think we know technology and knowledge-based industries are the wave of the future. So just leveraging the comparative advantages that you have in those areas, but also as regards manufacturing and the more technical and higher level types of skills that are needed for that. Also, you know, making it possible for people to transition out of traditional blue-collar type occupations into these future occupations, which require a lot more skill with information technology particularly, but having educational facilities. The German economy in Europe is done relatively well because they have this bigger diversity in the education process to help people across the gamut get the skills they need for the economy as it evolves. And I think maybe tilting a little away from academic toward that, but still leading the world in academic. I mean, part of the U.S. comparative advantages at places like Harvard and MIT attract the best and the brightest from all over the world. If you look, the U.S. has a way disproportionate number of Nobel Prizes compared to the size of its population, or a disproportionate amount of the best graduate programs in the world. But a lot of that's because we've been open to the rest of the world, and the people, those Nobel Prizes, just as often as not, went to people who were born abroad but came here to realize opportunities, the way Steve Jobs' father did. And there's just all kinds of examples. So we need to have an economy that has the best opportunities in the world for people, and we need to let people from all over the world take advantage of those opportunities here. But we need, because of this income inequality problem that's only going to get worse, we need to put more and more attention on how we can keep a middle class in the face of these trends which are driving income inequality higher and higher. And that would involve having education that helps people stay in the middle class by training them for the jobs of the future. And that's a very difficult thing because the future is happening faster and faster. That's the implication of the exponential change in technology.
Mm. Yeah, it seems like a theme here is about the education, and that's being a major part. And so it seems like Massachusetts, with its education facilities that we have here, it could be a positive thing into the future. John, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about small businesses in the U.S. I know you touched on this in your presentation, and I know Staples does a small business survey each year. What expectations do you have for small businesses and how they may act into the new year?
Yeah, well, I think the real challenge for small business has been, number one, getting capital, and small business formation in many other recessions, people would get laid off from large companies, tire of that cycle, and decide I'm going to take destiny into my own hands and I'm going to start up a business for myself. And those people often tapped home equity to get the capital to get started. And of course, in most parts of the country, people are struggling to have any home equity, so that wasn't a source for them. And then banks really struggled with many of the deleveraging activities that they went through over the last couple of years. And so after being criticized for granting credit to people that didn't deserve it, the banks have dramatically cut back, and you can imagine how difficult it would be to make a case for needing capital if you were just getting a business started. So the banks, credit policies have hurt there as well. Bank of America has talked about adding a lot of small business lending activities across the country, and I think that kind of activity will really help. But at the end of the day, it's optimism, and it's capital that makes it happen.
Yeah, I don't know, Mr. McGee, if you have any thoughts about sort of the state of small businesses and what expectations
I
are
would
going to be.
completely agree. The Federal Reserve has done a lot of looking into small business credit and small business formation. If you look at corporate CEO confidence, it's set record levels during this recovery. It surpassed the last recovery. These are the people whose businesses are more tied into the global economy. But if you look at small businesses, it's lagged way behind, and it's improved, but it's still at what traditionally were recession levels. But the biggest factor is that a lot of people, I forget the statistic, but it's very significant, tap their home equity to finance a business start. And being underwater means you can't do that. So the Federal Reserve's actually, he's probably familiar with this study, but that's pretty much what we're seeing is that that's had a big inhibiting effect on small business formation. The other thing is all last year, I would say in my talks, so we're in a new environment. It's an environment where if you want to get a loan, you've got to show you can pay it back. And so that, basically that's what's happening. We had a period where credit standards went out the window. There was all kinds of corruption in the lending process in terms of how it was evaluated. And now we're going back to the way it should be, but that's a tough transition. And so that's also part of what's going on.
Please, Ted.
Yeah, interesting. Our perspective, we, since we're privately held, and it leveraged ESOP, we very much need to rely on our bankers to grow our business. And we just did a global credit refinancing this summer. And we found it surprising that it was, the terms were as positive as they had been in our prior one, in 2006 before the economic downturn. It surprised us, but I think what it was indicative of is there's kind of two tiers. There was a lot of money in the banks, and I don't want to speak for some of our bankers are actually out here, Bank of America leading, but others, that there was a lot of money that was there for the companies that could demonstrate a good track record and strength, but it was not there for the smaller businesses or less secure. So it was sort of two tiers, and we benefited from it, but I clearly understood the trend that both the gentlemen are talking about.
Yeah, capital markets are as attractive as they've ever been for credit, high credit quality companies. The bond market has way more demand. Last week, the concessions for new issues were negative. So what that means is people were willing to pay more for new bonds than they were for the same company's bonds that were trading in the market. And I think that there's tremendous investor demand out there, and the last couple of years investors have not looked for risk capital. So high credit quality corporations can raise all the debt that they need at very attractive rates today.
And I would just add that this is another indication of you've got very strong, very positive parts to the economy, and you've got these problem areas where these longer-term adjustments are occurring. So to just look at the whole economy and say it's so-so doesn't really do justice to the fact that there's a lot of strength in certain things, and then the problem areas where things are working out the excesses of the past.
We got a couple questions about China, so I'd be interested in hearing from you, Ted, and Mr. McGee as well. I think you had alluded to Ted, some of the challenges emerging in China now, and maybe some increased activity in some other Asian markets. Can you talk specifically about what some of those challenges are? And then, Mr. McGee, if you don't mind about talking about, it seems like you were sort of high on the U.S. compared to some of the Chinese manufacturing operations. If you could talk about that as well. So, Ted, if you want to start.
There's just something I alluded to. The wage rate increases are staggering. So trying to react to that and so forth. but there's just so many big trends that happen in China. This company, Foxconn, is the largest contract manufacturer. While they're the largest employer in that space, hundreds and hundreds of thousands, they just announced in the last month that they're in the midst of purchasing 1 million robots, which is just staggering to me. And I met an executive of this company that said they're having trouble finding, people who want to work in manufacturing. So there's just lots of big change going on. One of the big trends, and I think it benefits Western companies, is when you think of the disproportionate influence that U.S. and Western companies have that Tim alluded to, they are very much driving corporate social responsibility, and you probably would have seen articles like Apple and their suppliers in the New York Times this past week. But we're seeing the companies like Microsoft, like Philips from Europe and others are really, Nike, are really taking a much more seriously the whole corporate social responsibility, auditing their suppliers. So it's a big and growing trend that we'll see more of, particularly as you see kind of some of the negative articles like just came out in the New York Times on this Foxconn supplying Apple iPhones and so forth. Mm-hmm. So a lot of things really unfolding in China, a lot of different dynamics going on.
Mr. McGee.
Well, sort of was sanguine about the fact I don't think China's going to overtake the U.S. Now, certainly they could become the biggest economy in the world in terms of GDP because they've got 4 times or more as the people. But in terms of leading the world, that's really, in my opinion, when I talked about these past paradigms that were compared to the U.S. and deemed to be the wave of the future, where they all failed is they don't have the freedom and openness of information, and or they have more restrictive cultural norms that limit the innovation that occurs in the economy. If you look at China's response to the Arab Spring, basically they really tightened up their internet oversight of the people. If your approach to innovation is to use industrial espionage to have hundreds of thousands of people hacking into computers all around the world, by definition, you're always catching up. You're never getting ahead. People talk about the multiples of engineers that are there in China. But the fact is, all the innovation, if you look at what's happened in the last generation and what's happening right now, is occurring in the United States. And it's because we're more tolerant of a broader array of behavior. The government's less concerned about people doing things that may threaten it. And I think this is the Achilles heel that China's going to have and going to have to confront as time goes on, because basically we live in an information age and a model that's based on trying to censor and control information and to stop the exchange of ideas, by definition, is at a comparative disadvantage in the kind of global economy we're in.
Just as a final question, I wanted to ask Mr. Mahoney here. We actually got a question from the audience here about online efforts. And the question was, do you see the growth in click and ship shopping as a net positive or negative for providing quality jobs within your company and the country? And sort of a question I had as well is sort of, how do you manage this such a competitive online marketplace in a company like yours?
Yeah. Well, that's a big question. There's a lot that goes into that, the idea of internet businesses. We believe that being multi-channel is the best way to go. So our customers, there are certain things they want to come in and touch and feel in the store. For example, teachers are a big component of our customer base, and our teachers tell us they like to come in and get ideas by looking in an aisle in our store. At the same time, we call it the endless aisle by using our internet capabilities to be able to dramatically expand the assortment we have in our stores. So the online experience today isn't the same as the store experience. There are needs for both, and the total sales for any one industry has tended to get into the 15 or 20% range, rather than going to 75 or something like that. And there are clearly categories that that have taken more share, like electronics, but which are very, for whatever reason, price sensitive and commodity-like. But if you look at what Amazon's growth has come from, it's really come by adding categories. It hasn't come from gaining dramatically more share in many categories. So I think as far as what that means for jobs, I think it can create good jobs. We've just announced a new tech center in Kendall Square in Cambridge to attract the really high-end talent that can help our website improve more dramatically, and there are very good jobs there. Jobs that relate to pick, pack, and shipping product to customers are probably about the same pay rates as those of our store associates. So I don't think it's necessarily a net bad thing for jobs. There continue to be a lot of activities that need to be done to handle the fundamental logistics of getting product to customers. So,
Excellent. Well, thank you very much to all the panelists here. Again, this is Ted Lapres from Nipro, John Mahoney from Staples, and Robert McGee from U.S. Trust. So if we give them a round of applause. And I will hand it back to Peter to close it up.
So you noticed everyone was really aware of their time. We have sort of some Germanic influence on the way we put together our agendas. And so we promised you that we would wrap up by 9:45, and thus the hour has arrived. So thank you all for coming. I hope this has been enlightening for everyone. I want to thank again Ted, John, and Tim, and Brandon for their work, and certainly Bank of America, Charter Business, and Nichols College, as well as Partridge, Snow and Hahn, and Love Bolus for their support. Thank you all for coming. Hopefully we can take a few minutes to chat. And please do fill out your economist forms. We'd love to get your name on a slide for next year and have you take you out to dinner. Okay, thanks again, everyone.